Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. How is everyone doing? I hope you all are in the best of health, best of states, as we continue on this next episode 5 for the pursuit for meaning. In our last session, we were discussing about science and the limitations of science and how it can draw sure knowledge and over our experience of science over these years and how science has been a tool that has given us lots of benefits for sure, but it has its limitations, especially as we go on to discuss like what are the questions of life, what is the ultimate purpose of life. This is the realm where science seems to break away in its capacity to answer these questions. So to answer this question of what is the meaning of our life, we need to be able to get a very conclusive answer. So I was mentioning earlier in episode 3 about what other knowledge are there, what other sources of sciences are there that claims to be able to answer these questions of ultimate questions of life. And we have discussed about science, and now the next part is where we will discuss about philosophy. So there are many branches of philosophy, many different perspectives. Of course, the text that we'll go through from Maulana Farman Ansari does not exhaust all different kinds of philosophy, but in general, it gives us a general broad stroke perspective of what philosophy is, and it's the foundational perspectives of each different schools of thought, and how we are able to, in broad strokes, understand what philosophy tries to do and its capacity in answering these questions. So let's, without further ado, this next section of philosophy from the Quranic Foundation of Society by Maulana Fadhil Ansari. Let's go. Number 2, philosophy. All philosophy may be broadly classified into 4 schools, namely 1, formal rationalism, number 2, empiricism, number 3, criticism, and number 4, empiricism rationalism. Of these 4, 2 and 3 do not deserve consideration in the background of our present problem, and that for very definite reasons. No, 2, namely empiricism, holds that the only source of obtaining knowledge is sense experience. It means that empirical philosophers cannot even aim at trying to understand the whole of reality, because in their very nature, the human senses are very limited in their scope and also liable to error, as we have already seen in the section on science. So I guess this empiricism is also a perspective of how science looks at the world. So because of that, the philosophical method of using sensory as a means of drawing sure knowledge, he rejects it straight away. And we carry on. Indeed, the only natural and logical consequence of empiricism is skepticism, namely that we cannot know reality. In other words, the philosophy of the empiricist school itself asserts the incompetence and the failure of the philosophical endeavor to answer the ultimate questions. As regards number 3, namely criticism, it says that both reason and senses are sources of knowledge, but that both are very limited sources. Hence, the knowledge of the world which we can get through them can only be very limited in its scope as well as character. In other words, according to this school of philosophy, philosophical effort can succeed only in knowing a part of reality. This, in its turn, means that comprehensive and sure knowledge, which is the necessary condition for solving the ultimate question successfully, cannot be attained by philosophy. So the next one, number 2, which we discuss here, is criticism. It itself, by the method of its inquiry, and its assertion that it can only know limited, so it has very limited sources, he then removes it also from the picture, because itself, by its methodology itself, shows that it cannot attain full knowledge. We continue. So the number 3, thus there remains only 2 schools of philosophy, namely formal rationalism and empirical rationalism. where the belief is found that philosophy can discover the ultimate truth, which alone, therefore, deserve our consideration in connection with the present discussion. Let us examine the validity of that claim. So let's go. Number one, formal rationalism holds that the human reason, unaided by anything else, is capable of knowing the ultimate effects of life and the world. Empirical rationalism holds that reason and sense experience should combine to enable human being to find out the ultimate truth, and that through this combination of sources of knowledge, philosophy can solve the ultimate problems and guide humanity in that behalf. Formal rationalism depends wholly on logic. Its method is to choose a hypothesis as a starting point of its investigation, and on that hypothesis to build up a whole world of philosophical thought by using the instruments of logic. Empirical rationalism may be better named as philosophy of science. Its method is to collect and arrange the facts discovered by science and to endeavor, by using the instruments of reason, to form an integrated picture of the world as a whole and thereby to answer the ultimate questions. If we evaluate formal rationalism, we find that on the face of it, it is incapable of giving us any sure and accurate knowledge of the ultimate problems. This is so because its starting point is always a hypothesis, which is nothing more than a supposed idea or at best an observation based on common sense, and it has always been chosen by every philosopher arbitrarily. Now, every hypothesis, especially in the realm of abstract thought, is, in its very nature of the case, unverifiable. In other words, it is uncertain. And if it's uncertain, the thought structure built upon it and the conclusions arrived at must also be uncertain. That is, the knowledge of ultimate problems given by formal rationalism cannot be sure and accurate. As regards empirical rationalism, its starting point consists in the scientific facts, namely sensory observation and its methods to reason out the ultimate problems on their basis. But as we have seen in the discussion of the scientific method, scientific facts are at best workable hypotheses or working materials on the scale of observation or the system of reference which they are connected. Hence, for ultimate problems, they have neither finality, nor perfect accuracy, nor absolute certainty. This means that if the starting point and the working material of empirical rationalism lacks accuracy, certainty, and finality, the conclusions arrived at also will suffer from the same shortcomings. In other words, a solution of the ultimate problems on the basis of a sure knowledge is impossible even for the empirical rationalist school of philosophy. An eminent scientific thinker of the modern times admits this truth in the following words: many people wrongly think that logical mechanisms are standard, and that logical reasoning, and all the more so mathematical reasoning, are inevitably true. This is not always the case. We must beware of the processes of human thought because, in the first place, the starting point is often a sensorial observation, therefore a doubtful value, or an observation based on common sense. Now, common sense cannot be trusted. It is common sense that leads us to think that the earth is flat, that the two plumb lines are parallel, they are both directed towards the center of the earth and consequently form an angle, and that motion in a straight line exists, which absolutely falls as we have to take into consideration not only the motion of the earth around its axis and around the sun and then the entire orbit of the earth, but also the motion of the whole solar system towards the constellation Hercules. As a result, a bullet or an aeroplane which seems to move in a straight line with respect to the earth for a certain length of time, in reality follows a trajectory more closely resembling a kind of corkscrew with respect to a vaster system of reference, the nearest star for instance. Common sense tells us that the edge of the razor blade is a continuous straight line, but if you examine under a microscope, it resembles a wavy line drawn by a child. Common sense tells us that the piece of steel is solid. X-ray shows us that it is porous, and modern theories of matter teaches us that it is reality made up of trillions of animated miniature universes having extra rapid movements and no contact with each other. If therefore the starting point, the premise of a reasoning is false, the conclusion will necessarily logically be false. Another thing I just want to highlight about reason and logic, like um, it is a very useful tool. It is a tool which gives us a lot of insight um, to understand our limitations and to understand problematic thinking and fallacies and all that kind of stuff. But of course, in everything that we use in our mind is dependent of our experiences, dependent on what we know, dependent on so many variable factors. There is a limit to what it can do. There's a limit to what it can encompass. Like if we look at the power of logic. Logic has been used to justify the massacre of millions of people. Logic has given rise to fanaticism, fascism, and all the isms there is. But also, no logic will also result in extreme thoughts of today, where there is no 1 plus 1 equals to 5. No 1 plus 1 equals to 7. Having no logic will result in that also. So it's very important for us to know the limitations and the capacities and the functions of logic for us to be able to harness its power in its full capacity. All right, let's continue. As we have no other means of knowing and describing nature but those given to us by our senses and faculties, i.e., by our brain cells, we must be extremely cautious and never forget the relativity of the picture of which we construct, a reality which, with respect to the recording instrument, man. So what he's talking about here is really what I was mentioning about, like what you are, we are projecting our perspective onto the world. The hypothesis starts with our common sense, our projections, our perspective of what happens. Like some sort of how you understand like self-fulfilling prophecies. You want to see what you want to see. So even in a hypothesis, scientists have their own biases. They for example, a scientist might have a deep hatred for the idea of God, or even like this idea of God and stuff like that. So he creates or hypothesizes in a perspective which really comes from himself, and everything else that he looks into will be looked by this lens. If I Let me give you an example. If I do not look at things objectively, if I want to look myself as a look at something through example a red eye lens, like I use orange lens for example, orange sunglasses, the reality of the what I will look into the world is all orange. It will be in orange shades, not because the objects there are really orange, but because my imposition, my lens, which makes me look at things the way it is. So the objective and the importance of this is to know that you need to remove those lenses to see it for what it is. And most of us in our, based on racial, social, economic and environments and backgrounds, we have imposed lenses on ourselves. And these lenses are imposed to us by our surroundings, our parents, our education, the propaganda, media, and all that kind of stuff. And in fact, all those lenses hide from us the reality of what things are, hide from us the reality of things in its true nature. And so this is one of the problems that what you human being face. And what is our objective? What is our purpose? Is to be able to peel away those lenses, peel away those perspectives, peel away those things which hinder us. I was basically here mentioning how perspectives that we inherit, some of it is good, some of it is bad, and our objectives as human beings is to be able to cut through all those perspectives and to take it as for what it really is. Yeah, so that was what I was trying to say before my mic got cut off. So I think we'll stop here for, it's been quite of a mouthful so far. So there's just one more section that I want to go through, finish up the philosophy part. Once we finish up the philosophy part and we enter into the next realm called how to answer the question of the ultimate problem is through religion. And then we'll continue on to our next book. Until the next one, I hope you guys are well, in the best of states. Remember, the links to my Discord is below here, and join it, and we'll continue on from there. Assalamualaikum.